Let me read to you a passage from the 23rd chapter of St. Matthew's Gospel, verses 1 to 12. It's the Gospel for Sunday of the 31st week in Ordinary Time. St. Matthew writes, Jesus said to the crowds and to his disciples, "The teachers of the law and the Pharisees sit in Moses' seat, so you must obey them and do everything they tell you. But do not do what they do, for they do not practice what they preach. They tie up heavy loads and put them on men's shoulders, but they themselves are not willing to lift a finger to move them. Everything they do is done for men to see. They make their phylacteries wide and the tassels of their garments long. They love the place of honor at banquets and the most important seats at the synagogues. They love to be greeted in the marketplaces and to have men call them Rabbi. But you are not to be called Rabbi, for you have only one master and you are all brothers. And do not call anyone on earth your father, for you have one Father, and he is in heaven. Nor are you to be called teacher, for you have one teacher, the Christ. The greatest among you will be your servant. For whoever exalts himself will be humbled, and whoever humbles himself will be exalted." That's from Matthew chapter 23, verses 1 to 12. What does it suggest to us? Well, it speaks of acknowledging the Lord as God. What do I mean? Well, the foundation of the Ten Commandments is the first commandment. I am the Lord your God. You shall not have other gods before me. Some scholars have maintained that the original stress of the first of the Ten Commandments was not on the exclusive oneness of God, but rather on the right of Yahweh God to Israel's exclusive worship and loyalty. They maintain that this commandment as given to Moses did not formally declare that there were no gods, called such by the peoples, other than the Lord, but that Israel was not to worship any of them. It was a commandment directed to Israel, and it required that the Lord, Yahweh, was to be their only God. Such scholars think indeed that the first commandment presupposes the existence of other gods. Well, let us leave the academic debate to one side, and for argument's sake allow that the stress may have been on exclusivity of worship and loyalty rather than on the divine oneship. In any case, the gods of other religions were at most mere spirits, real or unreal, and endowed with certain powers that competed with the greater powers of a higher spirit or God. They were scarcely imagined as comparable to Yahweh. If, as an historical fact, the first commandment did not formally declare that such spirits, such deities, were non-existent, this would not contradict the strict monotheism that was definitely implied in it. Historical revelation makes it clear, in fact, that there are spirits. There are angels and there are demons. Many peoples worshipped their ancestors and deified them, without conceiving them as equivalent to Yahweh. What is indispensable is the command that all worship and obedience must be rendered to the Lord. Whatever so-called deities, ancestors and spirits and demons there might be, none were to receive any honor due to God alone. The ever-present temptation bewitching societies was to attribute divine power and status to lesser unseen beings, whether known or imagined, whether good or evil. Whether fully and explicitly understood at the time of the revelation, or understood with reflection and further revelation over time, the duty to adore God as the Lord of everything that exists is required by the first commandment, the first of the Ten Commandments. Man is to render to God the individual and community worship which is his due, to pray to him with sentiments of praise, of thanks, and of supplication, to offer him sacrifices, above all, the spiritual sacrifice of one's own life. All this is seen by the Christian as to be lived in union with the perfect sacrifice of Christ. Christ's fulfillment of the first commandment is its perfect fulfillment. Man is able to fulfill this command in a new and especially elevated way by uniting himself to Christ in a life of obedience to God and his holy will. There are implications of this for our search for truth, Many people do not bother with the truth. Their sloth leads them to shrug off such matters. But if God is the Lord of all, and if man has the obligation to acknowledge his lordship over all, then man is obliged to seek to know God and his will for us. It is therefore implied by the first and greatest commandment that every person has the right and the moral duty to seek the truth about God and what he has revealed. That is also to say that everyone has the duty to seek to know Christ and his church. Once known, every person has the right and the moral duty to embrace this truth, to guard it faithfully, and to render God authentic worship. This freedom to seek and embrace the truth of God is the most fundamental right and duty, because without this knowledge one cannot fulfill the basic commandment as God intends it to be observed. The modern atheist or agnostic, a class of persons pervading all levels of modern Western society, cannot in the nature of the case fulfill this foundational commandment. His considered position, atheistic or agnostic as the case may be, is condemned by this commandment. If it is founded on a conception of human autonomy, that conception is false. The fulfillment of this command leads to man's flourishing. It takes him to holiness and to heaven. In our gospel today, our Lord tells us that we have but one master and that we are all brothers. We have but one Father, and he is in heaven. We have but one teacher, the Christ. He it is that we ought exalt, and we do so by lives of generous obedience to the divine will, lived out in union with Christ by the faithful fulfillment of our daily duties and responsibilities. Let us then exalt God and humble ourselves, for our Lord tells us that whoever exalts himself will be humbled, and whoever humbles himself will be exalted.